All right, well, welcome everybody. Thanks for your patience. There's always a little bit at the very beginning. Welcome to Devva's Room, Disability History and Culture for Everyone, the second Wednesday of the month at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Info on future and past events, registration, playlist, and donation opportunity is available at bit.ly/Devva's Room. D and R are capitalized. Co-sponsored by Disability History and Culture Collective, DHACC, and I Love You Lead On Community. And we have a QR code. Next slide. Tonight in Devva's Room, Wednesday, May 13th, 2026, performing disability from freak shows through reality television and beyond. Presented by Dr. Katya Vrtis. Did I say that correctly? Info on future and past events, registration. Vrtis, thank you. Info on future and past events, registration, playlist, and donation opportunity is available again at bit.ly/Devva's Room. Next slide. Coming up next month in Devva's Room on June 10th, 2026, we have Grover Hogan and Rick Barry, who will discuss a medley of topics, including Lois Curtis and the Olmstead Act, outsider art, including Lois's, and the long road to a National Disability Museum. Again, info on future and past events, registration, playlist, and donation opportunity, all are available at bit.ly/Devva's Room, capital DNR. Just a heads up, this event is not to be recorded. This live session is being recorded by DHACC and I Love You Lead On for registered participants and those in our community. It will be shared directly with you. Please do not record, copy, or share this event yourself. If you see this recording anywhere other than our official emails or website or on our own YouTube channel, it has been shared without our permission. Next slide. Contact us for help or accessibility requests. If you need help accessing the event or want to request a voice option during the presentation, email us at leadon@iloveyouleadon-leadon.com. Next slide. Zoom etiquette and access. During the presentation, all Zoom attendees will be muted to support access and reduce background noise. If you need to use voice to communicate during the presentation, email us and we'll arrange a separate voice space just for that. After the presentation ends, we'll open up mics for conversation, unrecorded, one voice at a time, as usual. Chat comments will be read aloud to provide access. If you don't want chat read aloud, use private message to one of the hosts. Next slide. Accessibility info. ASL is provided for the presentation and will be spotlighted. Auto captions are available and can be viewed on screen or as a transcript. In the Zoom toolbar, there is a CC option. If it is not there, click the three dots for more options and locate it there. The ability to show, hide, or adjust captions is there, as well as the option to view captions as a transcript. What makes Devva's Room unique? Disability studies tends to be discussed in academic settings using complicated jargon, making it inaccessible to many. Here, we take it out of the classroom and into conversation. In keeping with that, we invite our ASL interpreter to participate fully, asking questions and joining the discussion if and when they have them. Next slide. Devva's Room sessions are recorded. All Devva's Room sessions are recorded and will be available on our playlist within a few days with corrected captions and transcripts. You can find the playlist on the Devva's Room website at bit.ly/Devva's Room, D and R capitalized. Next slide. Content trigger warning. Tonight's presentation discusses material that may be distressing to some viewers. Discretion is advised. Includes references to sexual violence, kidnapping, other abuse, and other horrors. Next slide. If you want to present at a future Devva's Room, let us know your ideas. Email leadon@iloveyou-leadon.com. L and O are capitalized before the @ sign. ILYLO after the @ sign are capitalized.
I am Dr. Katya Vrtis. My PhD is from Tufts University in what at the time was called drama and is now the Department of Theater History and Performance Studies. And my interests are, go away, sorry. Is the black box at the top still in the way?
Still there. It's not in the way at the moment.
I thought it was going to go before it went away. I'm just sorry. The tech is defeating me. Right. Sorry. Tufts University got my PhD. My dissertation work was actually on identity and race in American communism, specifically Langston Hughes. But while I was doing my dissertation, I was diagnosed with Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, had 4 surgeries, spent weeks in the hospital, and it sent me in the new direction of exploring disability on stage. And that brought me inevitably to the tradition of freak shows and freak performance, which has gone by a number of names across time and space, but I'm going to be using that one. For this performance, for this talk, I will be using the term freak show and also disability very inclusively to capture the range of non-normative bodies that were displayed and conceptualized in medicalized terms in the period. Some of those conditions we would not necessarily consider disabilities today, but I'm taking the historical perspective of what was seen as disability at the time. I wanted to start off with this amazing quote by Elizabeth Gross from Intolerable Ambiguity, Freaks as at the Limit. And this is the best definition of a freak I have ever seen. Sorry. The freak is an object of simultaneous horror and fascination because, in addition to whatever infirmities or abilities he or she exhibits, the freak is an ambiguous being whose existence imperils categories and oppositions dominant in social life. Freaks are those human beings who exist outside and in defiance of the structure of binary oppositions that govern our basic concepts and modes of self-defining. They occupy, typo, the impossible middle ground between the oppositions that divide the subject from all ambiguities, interconnections, and reciprocal classifications outside of or beyond the human. And to break this out of academic speak, what she's talking about is humans define ourselves by this, not that. So living, not dead, male, not female, white, not BIPOC, other, colonial subject. And these dyads are hierarchical. Somebody's always in more power. And so collapsing those dyads, those binaries, doesn't just show that there are more options. It actually fundamentally challenges the power system that depends on those oppositions to say these people deserve control and power, these people don't. And that is at the heart of what a freak is. So some very important concepts. Tirada. It is now most commonly seen in the study of birth defects. It literally means monster or divine sign. And teratology is the study of monsters. It has a medical side, as in the study of certain disabilities, often involving embryo development. but it also refers to um, a whole range of interpretations of people who with disabilities or who are otherwise non-normative being signs of a god or gods actions or anger. Freak shows. A freak show is any performance space, physical or conceptual, in which an individual who has what's called an extraordinary body, a non-normative embodiment, often but not always a disability, is framed not as just a person with a debility, but a freak, a person who is collapsing these core definitions of how the world works. Reality TV, I think most of us know what that is. It is a highly edited and not remotely real depiction of circumstances that are presented as if they are real. Disability, which in the period of the height of the freak shows was very much in medical terms. Something is wrong with your body and it should be fixed or you should be removed from the population. And now mostly we're in the social theory or other variants based on it that say there's nothing wrong with how our body minds exist in the world. The problem is the exclusion of society, forcing us outside of it. Infrequent, this is the way in which somebody is converted from a person to a freak. And it's often highly contextual. So Maud Stevens up there, who is a very famous tattooed lady, if she's in a dress to her neck and out in public and nobody knows who she is, she's seen as a proper lady. When she strips down on stage, now she's a freak. Saartjie Baartman was a victim of colonial violence and enslavement, but when she was forced onto a pedestal and people were able to gasp and shock over her absolutely normal for her people embodiment, then she is constructed as a freak and used to justify colonial violence. When we say natural versus made, the idea of a natural freak is somebody, again, often with a disability, somebody whose body is or mind is just naturally divergent and weird, versus made, which is somebody like Ms. Stevens, who has made the choice to alter herself in such a way that she'd be able to become a freak performer. And then there's also static versus plastic. So is this a state of being that you're in all the time, or is it something that is picked up and put down depending on the situation? In sideshows, typically there's a third category, which is going to be our performers, our stunt performers, who do things like sword swallowing, fire swallowing. But in terms of audience understanding, they usually fall into that category of made freaks. Though their Maud would be static in that having changed her body, she can't unchange it, versus somebody who, if they aren't swallowing a sword, they aren't a sword swallower today. So, exhibiting freaks before Barna. The infrequent of people whose bodies are different is ancient. As we see, there's the stele of an Egyptian court dwarf from almost 5,000 years ago. And the tradition of the court dwarves made it all the way up through the early modern period, but not just little people, as we see with this portrait of Antonieta Gonzalez, other people who were constructed as freaks or monsters would also be brought to the courts in this space somewhere between enslavement and job opportunity. It got very fuzzy depending on which court you're talking about. On the flip side, there's also this idea of the medical, the study of what were called natural monsters, Tarada. So the Greeks were obsessed with the idea of the hermaphrodite, and Hermaphroditus was a minor god. So an intersex people. And so this kind of statuary would be seen as having a medical value. Likewise, the Nuremberg Chronicles is about signs about the end of the world. And combined with medieval Christianity, we have depictions of conjoined or parasitic twins, which are constructed as monsters and signs of the coming apocalypse. And this continues onward with cabinets of curiosities and displays of bodies and body parts. The line between medical museum and freak show is extremely porous. And many of these spaces that are supposedly medical are really making money off of the freak framing of their remains. Then P.T. Barnum comes onto the scene. He's taking an old idea, but he expands that cabinet of curiosity into his American Museum, which is the first of the dime museums. The original one ran from 1841 to 1868. The Bridgeport, Connecticut version is still open. There is still a market for old-style freak shows. Even though there's this narrative of it being done, it's still there. These were wildly popular entertainments. They had, in the years at the original New York site, 38 million visitors. The country had 32 million people in population at that time. It is just a massively popular kind of entertainment. The museums were presented as educational and had things like zoos and aquariums and a lecture hall for scientific lectures, which were sometimes actually scientific, more often highly invented, outright fakes like the Fiji mermaid, and of course the freak shows. Freak performance gave ordinary, poor audiences access to the kinds of people who had once been relegated to royal or medical control. Especially since we got to keep in mind that there are active ugly laws. So disabled people couldn't just live their lives, get regular jobs. They would be fined or arrested for being on the streets and upsetting people, which really made the freak show one of the only spaces they could exist in. Once this model, and then its more mobile version, the circus sideshow, was proven to be popular, the entire industry exploded. And that brings us to the height of the freak show. So, why are audiences flocking to this kind of event? It was seen as cultural and educational, but very cheap. The dime museums often were literally a dime. Barnum's museum was 25 cents. It was accessible mass culture aimed at that growing middle class, very middlebrow, that like to pretend at education and high art while really rolling around in the gutter. However, these were considered safe spaces. When women were unable to attend the theater without an escort, they could go to a freak show alone. It was considered safe. It was cheap enough for the working class and the poor. And very importantly, it becomes a community event where everyone can go gawk at those who are different and reassure themselves as a group that they are normal, that they are people, they're not freaks, which means they get things like human rights and privileges. And in the hyper-controlling period of the late 19th century, this ability to indulge in a taste of freedom and deviance before being affirmed for their upright morality was wildly tempting. This brings us into the social function. These were serving a role that was very important. From Rosemary Garland Thompson, one of the greatest scholars of the topic, freak shows framed and choreographed bodily differences that we now call race, ethnicity, and disability in a ritual that enacted the social process of making cultural otherness from raw materials of physical variation. Freak shows were to the masses what science was to the emerging elite, an opportunity to formulate the self in terms of what it was not. And this highly ritualized element is key. The ability to indulge in the deviant and socially wicked, and then collectively reaffirm we are not that, close the door, and go back into the very rigidly confining roles of the period. While Thompson names race, ethnicity, and disability, I would also add gender to that, since a tremendous number of the acts, anything real intersex people or the fake Victor Victoria acts, everything from the fat woman to the skeleton man, these were about showing what a man or woman was supposed to be, what their roles in life were supposed to be, and warning of punishment should one deviate from that path. Disability and freakery are very entwined. While race, ethnicity, and colonialism is being worked out on the freak show stages, and gender and sexuality is definitely being worked out on the freak show stages, the intense cultural conflict around disability is very key here. Again, ugly laws prevented social existence, kept people isolated and alone, kept them from working, kept them impoverished. Also, disability was very much seen in moral terms. So if someone had a disability, something was wrong with either them or their family. And this was, again, back to that idea of the tirada. This is a sign of God's will. Therefore, mockery and violence is fully justified. However, behind the scenes at freak shows, you have a space where the disabled people are in control. Often they were the ones who were managers of that section of the circus. There's community, and we all crave community. And many performers saw themselves as in the position of power. They were getting one over on the society that had rejected them. And instead of being mocked for being ugly or different, they were becoming rich and famous, some of the very lucky ones. So yeah, we have the good news. Work, money, power, celebrity, and also an inclusive and supportive family of choice. Schlitzie Surtees is particularly known for this in that in the mid-20th century, activists not disabled activists, but activists opposed to freak shows on moral grounds, basically kidnapped Schlitzie and put him in a group home. We all know about 1950s group homes. And he was severely, severely depressed and isolated. And some of his coworkers from the freak shows found out about his condition and re-kidnapped him, helped him escape the medical establishment. And he went back to performing for the rest of his life, but also, again, living inside that inclusive and supportive family of choice in the backstage. On the flip side, kidnapping, enslavement, rape, other abuses. Sarcha Bartman, who I showed you a picture of earlier, nicknamed the Hottentot Venus. There's a play titled Venus about her. And because of the way that her, buttocks and glutes are shaped, this was supposed to be proof of hypersexuality, proof of Black female inferiority, and proof of the right for white men to conquer Africa and exploit the people within it, which they'd already been doing for centuries by that point. Though the kidnapping and forced display of Bartman was really at that moment where the African kingdoms were getting to the point they could not fight off in growing colonialism, and the colonial movement is about to go from more dealing with locals to just outright conquest. And her display across Europe was important for that rationalization. And as I'm sure you could all have guessed without me telling you, white men could pay an extra fee to examine her up close, which meant she was kidnapped from her home, forced around Europe, abused, and sexually abused for the rest of her life. Even after her death, her body was cut apart, and her sex organs and buttocks were cut off and put on display in a European medical museum up until very recently, near the end of the 20th century. Susan Laurie Park's play Venus actually was key in making that story known and getting her remains finally repatriated to her homeland in South Africa. Controlling managers, even when there isn't outright enslavement, this is the country that brought us sharecropping. There's a whole lot of wage theft, financial oppression, total control, social isolation and familial rejection. Not just the rejection by family of origin for going into the circus, into the freak shows, which are seen as very low class. But there were and remain deep divides in the disabled community about whether or not this is acceptable, whether this is participating in our own exploitation. Exclusion from broader society. While they had a protective micro-society, it was very closed from the broader society. And of course, the entire point is dehumanization and denial of humanity. They might get paid, but the whole job is to prove the inferiority of people with disabilities. George and Willie Muse, the other photograph I have on this page, there's a book, True Vine, if you're not familiar with, you should probably give it a look. They were free Black men with albinism in the late 19th century into the early 20th century. And as boys, a passing circus promoter saw them and kidnapped them and held them as prisoners for decades, forcing them into performance in freak shows. Their mother worked for years and years to find them, and then there was a major lawsuit in which she proved that they had been kidnapped and were returned to her care. By that point, they were adults, and one of the things that's very interesting in their case is after they were freed, after the man who abused them for so long was forced to pay for the work that they had been compelled to do, after all of this, they went back into freak show work because they had community there, they had the opportunity to make money there, they had become quite famous. Of course, in that case, money was going to them, they controlled their schedules, and they could go home to their mother when they wanted to. So there is this complexity of it can be a site of empowerment, but also there's so much horror. So the age of freak shows for all the old style freak shows still exists in places like Coney Island and the Barnum Museum in Connecticut. The height really ended about World War II. There are a number of things going on. One, earlier in the period of the freak show, freaks were really thought of in terms of moral depravity. Again, disability was a sign of moral failing. As disability became more medicalized, it was actually an advantage in some ways in that the idea of exploiting disabled people no longer seems so justified because disabilities were not a sign that they're bad people. It's just a sign that they, had a disability. Rise of film and TV. Cheaper entertainments, more convenient entertainments, more popular. Again, these moral debates over whether or not it's right or wrong to for disabled people to perform as freaks, whether the entire concept of a freak show is a moral thing to exist at all. Also, it's not on the list, but World Wars I and II, the vast casualty numbers, the incredible rate of men coming back disabled and women who worked as auxiliaries coming back disabled. It was very hard to treat disabled people the same way when they're also supposed to be national heroes. And also 1932 film freaks. This is a weird film because while it is framed as horror and the last 20 minutes are a, horror revenge, most of it is a domestic drama about life in the backstage community at freak shows. The performers, up until, again, that ending, are treated as people. Their relationships are the focus. And Todd Browning was a sideshow performer. He was considered, again, a talent act rather than a freak act. Though his talent was being buried alive and eating chocolate bars and peeing in diapers until he was dug up 2 days later on a regular basis. But he came from this community, and most of the performers in the film, the freak performers, were people he knew, people he'd worked with. But the broader audience refused to empathize with the freaks of the film and saw Cleopatra and Hercules, who was the circus strongman in the film. And Cleopatra was a dancing girl. So again, the ideals of white gender roles as the villains. Because if you actually watch the film, they're terrible. They had a conspiracy to defraud the freaks, and yeah, they get he's murdered, she's turned into a chicken monster. But it's very much in the revenge genre rather than in the horror genre where it's placed. But for all that complexity, freak shows came back. And why did they come back? Mostly people are terrible. the opportunity to gawk at those who are different, to feel superior, to assure oneself that one is normal, unlike that guy, is really, really tempting. And so that's why we have an audience. Why do disabled people participate in reality television at quite high rates? Money. Again, we all know the realities of lack of living wages, lack of social support, unemployment, the crip tax, other, which is, if you don't know it, is an academic term for all of the extra costs of existing in a disabled body. Like, I can't live in a walk-up because I can't walk upstairs, so I have to live in a either on the first floor or in a modern building with an elevator, and that adds costs. Fame. People are people. And people like attention. Connection. Some of these shows can be an opportunity to meet others with similar disabilities, also to escape unhealthy home and family life. It can be seen as an escape. However, exploitation is still built into reality television, not just for people with disabilities, but very much including people with disabilities, especially a problem in the case of minors, as reality television doesn't have a lot of the same wage protection as the laws were passed, like in California, to protect child performers in child actors, because reality television isn't real, but they aren't considered actors. And finally, education. There are a lot of very idealistic people who believe that reality television can be a way to teach the truth about living with disability, and that the freak framing can be avoided. This is seen in particular in great detail in the early discussion of Little People, Big World, that those who were participating were very clear that they felt it was an opportunity to humanize, to teach the reality of existing as a little person in the modern US, in a world where quote unquote dwarf tossing is still a thing that happens. And the show got some awards from the National Little People Association for its educational work. However, all the goodwill in the world can't control an audience. And I did some more involved work on this topic, and there was very good evidence that the audience still received it as a freak show, that they weren't gaining empathy, they were pointing and laughing. And so, who's our audience? Again, much like with historical freak shows, though not in the pre-Barnum era where it was an elite entertainment, our typical viewer for disability reality television is white, suburban or rural, average income, possibly or lower, a woman, conservative, and with some college experience. And quote from a paper that broke all this down: "The power of the middle class relies on its institutionalized capacity to draw lines of exclusion." And so again, the audience, no matter how educational we think it is, the audience is looking for the opportunity to reaffirm that they are normal by otherizing the performers. And so again, extraordinary bodies, because we're talking quite broadly about freak performance in reality TV. My battery? What do you mean my... Sorry, I got a message that my um uh, laptop is running low on battery, which is weird because it's supposed to be plugged in. Anyway, Little People, Old Big World hit big and won awards for its educational work, the reality was more complicated. Shows like My 600-Pound Life, meanwhile, are much more outright exploitive and dehumanizing with very little pretense of empathy for participants. Some of the shows that really did succeed in breaking the freak show framing, like Push Girls, didn't find an audience because the audience is looking for freak shows. And then I had to highlight that some of the freak framing is just reality television, that we're trained to see anybody on reality television as a freak, but also that those with disabilities and those who have decided to make themselves freaks show up on across the genre. Evie Oddly, by the way, has Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, same condition I do. And then I'm a Permanent Tattooed Clown was on America's Got Talent, which again is based on the same kind of sideshow performance that always included and depended on freak shows. However, the big place for freak performance now is on social media, and it is getting even more out of control without the limits of an editor, a producer. For as exploitive as they are, they also have to obey laws. TikTok self-diagnosis and the TikTok tics, the socially contagious fake Tourette's and other conditions, for example, is a growing problem. Pranks are a kind of freak performance and get people killed. For anyone who fortunately does not recognize him, that's Andrew Tate on the bottom left. And he and his competitors are doing freak performance, capturing audience and using them to become more and more extreme. So we see some of these problems as self-diagnosis, false information, competition to be the most sick, irregular or no pay. Things like YouTube or TikTok, the performers aren't getting paid. They're getting all of the downsides without even getting the money. Coercive pressure towards unsafe modes of performance. So in the case of like Timothy Wilkes, in order to get the likes, he's going further and further and further until he was shot in a fake robbery. And of course, we see that in extremist rhetoric, that those who are trying to attract views and get the algorithm to pay attention to them are pushing not just extreme behavior themselves, but extremist behavior in the real world. Everyone is both a product and a consumer. Even if we try and resist this, we are interpolated into that system. There is no escaping it. There is no outside of it. I gave us the example of Jacques Whipper as a rare case in which freak or sideshow performance on social media has led to a successful career for him. And that's really awesome. He's also a cis, straight, abled white man, and it's extremely rare for somebody in that category to win at this. The algorithm game is even harder for those of us who are disabled and our content involves our own disabilities, and we get into that cycle of no matter what we want, the audience is most interested in gawking. What all of these entertainments share And what makes it a continuous tradition of freak performance is to allow the audience members to define themselves as normal by ritually identifying and rejecting those who are culturally designated as abnormal. The collective abnegation of the other is the point for the audience. That said, performances are never static. Freak show stages of all forms remain contested spaces of both exploitation and empowerment, especially for those with disabilities. Freak performance offers degradation and hope for a better future in equal measure, especially historically, but still for many today. However, we will always be dealing with the problem that the audience reaction will never be limited by what the performers intend. And thousands of years of saying disabled bodies on stage equals freak means it is almost impossible to get the audience to break out of that framing. The choice to go down that path is an individual one, but basic safety precautions are needed for at least physically keeping people safe, and preferably getting some limits to try and reduce the psychological harm. Because as long as cultural ableism exists, some people will make the choice that freak performance is their best option. Thank you all for coming. Please reach out, thoughts, questions, ideas. As I said, I'm Dr. Katya Vrtis. Usually I just go by Katya Vrtis. I'm an independent scholar of theater and performance studies, and I listed my email if anyone is interested in reaching out. I'm going to do a last editing pass because I noticed some typos in this, but then I will make the slides available via Devva's room for anybody who wants to go over them later. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And we can open it up for questions. We'll see how long Katya's voice holds out. But if you've got questions, you can either raise your hand, which I see Lily already has, or you can put them in the chat and we will read them out loud for you if that's what you prefer. But Lily, you want to ask your question?
Wow, yeah. I really appreciated hearing all that, and it's like anything, I guess, like you were talking about people who were kidnapped and trafficked at different points, but then of their own free will chose to like go back to the same work. And like some of my political and disability mentors had similar stories to that with sex work, like experienced trafficking or exploitation, but also of their own free will were like, okay, but also this is like a thing I can still do and use. And also like my experience. What's that?
I'm sorry, finish your thought.
And also like my experiences with like homelessness were somewhat like that. Like the first time I became homeless, it was not like by choice, but then I was like, oh, actually like I'm good at this and I can use this. And like there are like cultures and life ways within people experiencing this that like, yeah. Also, I know y'all used to partner with Mind Freedom, which is how I first found out about you, was when your group was partnering with Mind Freedom to do Judy's Room. I don't know if that's something that you were ever thinking of doing again, but this was really great. Thank you.
Thank you. I didn't go down the path of sex work, especially pornography, though it ties in, again, the same algorithm push to ever more extreme content, but also freak pornography has always been a major industry. A friend of mine actually writes about this, a friend of mine in the field. And disabled porn performers doing what's considered freak pornography is a huge and complicated topic, including, again, there are porn performers with my condition, and one of its effects is hypermobility. And contortion is a kind of freak performance shaped by disability, and then contortion porn is a subgenre of that. Likewise, my friend Krista Miranda has a book coming out, and it's a chapter. This is wonderful, on 1970s porn production, involving a amputee, and going advertised as stumping. I'll let you fill in your imagination from there. So again, this is a very connected industry, and just like with sideshow performance more broadly, voluntary freak performance is a way to be seen and get noticed and get opportunities. Whereas for those without disabilities, but those with disabilities are often, that's the only path they can take, because they aren't seen as normal for the quote unquote usual stuff.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
I also wanted, before the next question, I wanted to respond to Fred in the chat. Julia Pastrana, yes. Fascinating and horrible story. I had not seen the iconic corpse. I will have to check this out. I did do a paper involving the postmodern performances of disabled bodies that were infreaked, and the Julia Pastrana's husband sold her body and the body of her fetus, because she died in childbirth, to a freak show. He had already been managing, pimping her out as a freak performer for years. She was a gifted singer, but again, she couldn't, her work was framed through freak performance as opposed to just being a performer, being an artist. And her body was only recently repatriated to Mexico, and the body of her son had been on display in a museum in Finland. Again, one of those medical museums that's really itself a kind of freak show. And her body and the body of her son were stolen, and the body of her son ripped apart and left outside and not recovered. Her body was recovered and put in storage, but they just left her there. They didn't send her home until very recently, and there were a number of artists and performers who, like Susan Loy Parks, did quite a lot of work building the empathic connection through performance, in staging these funerals for her. And finally, her remains were repatriated after the turn of the millennium. Lily, yes, rescues from freak and sex work. This idea that obviously no one would choose it, and fewer people would choose it absent financial coercion. But again, we are all under financial coercion and forced to sell ourselves to some degree and in some ways to survive in this world. And so saying, childcare or mining or farming is a legitimate way to sell your time and body, and sex work or freak shows is not, is a very, let's just, problematic position. And as I mentioned with Schlitzie, it can be absolutely destructive for the people that are supposedly being saved. Other questions or thoughts in the chat or in the, speaking out loud?
And we lost Michelle's video.
Yeah.
Michelle, are you there?
Pardon the interruption. We've lost Michelle.
I don't know if Michelle knows.
We've got somebody on the phone who usually wants to say something.
Yeah, I do. It's something I can definitely relate to. As I, did a lot of one night standing, and I once even had a dream that I, a very long time ago that I, was trying to get paid for it, but never got paid for it. That it wound up all being volunteer, and I was extremely disappointed about it. And it mirrors so much of what the hell's going on in my life right now. Still being unemployed and stuck on Social Security when I'd rather be working part-time.
Yeah, can definitely relate to that. I am an independent scholar, which basically means I have a PhD and I'm unemployed. So I very much feel for that.
And I have some college.
Yeah, and so overeducated and underemployed is how I describe it. And
exactly.
It's very tough because I continue doing this research because it's very important to me, and people use it. Like, I get quoted, my publications get quoted, but also schools places want to hire somebody without a disability to teach my work. I have a trans friend who's in a similar boat where his work is taught all over, but people wanted to hire somebody who's not trans to teach his work because that's how the power system works. Fred, I see a hand up.
Okay, there I am. Yeah, I see kind of an overlap between how the sites of disability history, often places that are really places where atrocities occurred, that get turned into kind of like Halloween, haunted, like Pennhurst was for a while, was a haunted Halloween setting. Even and it intersects with gender as well. I mean, I haven't been there in a while, but Salem, if you go to Salem, the witch city, I mean, it's the site of these awful atrocities, and yet it's treated as this kind of creepy but fatty, fun, exploitation. So all of this seems to be tied together in ways that I'm trying to wrap my mind around. So thank you very much for the presentation. This is really excellent.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. I didn't go down the path because this is already quite a lot of material and we only have so much time. But one of what I have and do argue is that the most important violation that of binaries that freaks do are they are both human and monster. And we go into monsters and horror, and it gets tangled up because, for example, like there are a number of performers of monsters who are hired because they have the morphinoid habitus, that very long spidery body. Doug Jones has maintained he does not have morphans, but he definitely has the morphinoid habitus. And that unusual embodiment is used in horror films to represent non-human creatures, but it still dehumanizes those with those bodies that are different, that are marked. And this line, freaks are really the line at which who counts as human and who doesn't. And freak performance can be a way to step from non-human into human enough. Again, that's one reason people do it. If you're totally dehumanized, being partially dehumanized but paid for it can be an advantage. But on the other hand, it's still this complicated mess of who counts as human, and this is really important, not just in terms of conceptual but you only get human rights if you're counted as human. And so
yeah.
infrequent is the first step to monsterization, which is the next step to total denial of humanity. And that's when we go down the path into genocide. Like, there's no way to talk about this kind of stuff without eventually ending back up in eugenics and at Operation T4 and the Nazis, because it all circles back to who is allowed to be human and who is an object that is property to be exploited or destroyed.
Yeah, controlled.
Yeah.
For another thing.
And also, who's allowed to procreate?
Absolutely.
Oh, yeah, that's true. Yeah.
And form families. Within the freak show backstage communities, there's a very strong community, but historically marriages were under the control of marriages, and then of course procreation were under the control of the show owners. Infamously, the performer Thomas Stratton, General Tom Thumb, who worked for Barnum, was married to a woman named Lavinia, and I don't recall her surname, who was another of the little people who worked for Barnum, as a plot line.
Mm-hmm.
Like, the whole lead up and engagement and marriage, and they were both introduced to Queen Victoria, and it was a huge advertising campaign, and they weren't able to have children together, so he acquired a child that was then used as their child, so that he could again keep the story going. Fortunately, they got along okay, but like, there are a lot, like, you can't escape the similarity to the history of chattel slavery and rape as economic program that's happening at the same time. And it is tied into this who counts as human. And those that don't can be used and exploited as those that do wish. Other questions or comments? And as I said,
I would say that Margaret Sanger played such a role in the eugenics movement crap, unfortunately.
Not as much as it is often said. Yes, she did. But
yeah, I mean, yes, I support the fact that she got what I would call the birth control movement going, but she played a horrible part in the eugenics crap going, which wasn't just against disabled people, but against people of color.
I was going to say, she's absolutely part of that story, but it is its own fascinating history and of gender and power that her piece of it is exaggerated and it gets intense focus because she was a woman and because she promoted birth control and the ability to control one's fertility voluntarily.
A mixed bag.
Whereas the men who were at the center of it, the white men at the center of it, driving it, who were doing much, much more harm, who were passing laws for forced sterilization, who are arguing in court, are downplayed. And that is a statement about who has the power to be forgotten.
Yeah,
So it's
exactly.
not no apologia for her, but it troubles me that the story is told in a deceptive manner to make her seem more culpable than she was, and to
Right.
erase the people who did far more harm.
Yeah. Yeah.
I was just gonna say, also, if you don't have any questions, don't have any thoughts tonight, my email again is, you're welcome to email me if you have questions or thoughts later, or if you, as I said, I've done quite a lot of research and writing on these topics. So if there's something that you wanted, a copy of a paper, or or just wanted a discussion, Allison, who is a friend of mine, can affirm the problem is getting me, or Sharon can affirm the problem is getting me to stop talking about this stuff. So I really do welcome anyone who was interested in reaching out.
Can you post your email address in the chat maybe, or
Oh yes.
thank you.
I wonder if you've got any specific books that you'd like to recommend to people for if they're interested in this topic of where to start.
Absolutely. So this is an old book. It's from 1996. This is Freakery, Cultural Spectacles of the Extraordinary Body. It is edited by Rosemary Garland Thompson. She has a great introduction. The quote I gave from uh, uh, Elizabeth Gross is from the article is in this book. Bob Bogdan has a great article in here. He is also one of the people who's been writing about freakery and disability for decades, though his focus is less disability and more freak history. But again, his books are great, but this is the one to start with. And then, shameless self-promotion aside, this sequel just came out titled Freak Inheritance, Eugenics and Extraordinary Bodies in Performance, edited by Rosemary Garland Thompson, Michael Chemers, and Annalila Santana. And it is a sequel to Freakery. This started the field. This is where the field is today. And I have a chapter in here, actually very related to this talk, which is titled Freakish Fecundity, Birth and Baby Reality Television as Eugenist Discourse. You probably can't see, but I talk about the freak show element of things like 16 and Pregnant, or the 17, 18, 19 Kids and Counting, and the ways in which these questions of who has the right to reproduce are still being debated through reality television. But there's also a lot of brilliant other work that wasn't mine, so I would reject it. I would suggest it even if it wasn't, if I wasn't in it. So yeah, these two start here, and if you're interested, follow up here.
I'm wondering, when I was an undergraduate, one of the texts that we were exposed to or subjected to was Freaks by Leslie Fiedler. And I'm wondering if you were familiar with that and what you think of it.
This one.
Yes.
You can see in my library. It is not a book I reach for a lot.
Uh-huh.
I mean, it's an old book. It's
60 something, I think, isn't it?
78.
Oh, okay. Wow, later than I thought.
Yeah, so it is a valuable resource in having pulled together a lot of primary evidence. And again, there is the academic family tree. This leads to Bob Bogdan, leads to Rosemary Garland Thompson, leads to Michael Chemers, leads to me, and so many others. That said, I don't find his analysis to be as valuable now because the conversation has moved on.
Yeah, it's very early.
Yeah, it's very early. And so it did very important work, but it's out of date. However, if I want to reference some of the primary materials that he looked at and the documents he pulled, I will still go to it. It's just not one that like I quote on a regular basis. The other one I would say, if you're interested in going from freaks to monsters, which is a very, very related concept. It's running around here somewhere. Yeah, there it is. This book, Monster Theory, though you don't need to get the book. It what you really want and is available online for free everywhere, in a lot of places, because a lot of schools teach it, is Monster Culture, 7 Theses by Jeffrey Jerome Cohen. His focus is not so much on disability, but he is very interested in how monsters and monstrosity are used to put limits on who does and doesn't count as human.
Sure.
And so, and this also came out in 96 with this, and these two books kind of started a whole field discussion that intertwines these questions of freak shows and horror and monsters because they are very intertwined.
Allison has
yeah.
her hand up. Have you got some other books you wanted to add?
Those are the big ones.
Right, that was Allison's got her hand up. I thought
Oh
maybe
no,
you-
I just had another question, but if we need to break, that's totally fine. I can also text Katya if we're out of time. That's fine too.
Allison, what was your question?
I was interested in, you talked about like the audience, the research around like the audience for like reality television, which I found really interesting. And I was thinking like more broadly about the different demographics. I mean, I was wondering if you had any information on like the demographics for say like the original freak shows or sideshows versus how those compared to the demographics of like people who watch TLC. And then I was also thinking about this is kind of a tangential question, I'm sorry. I was also thinking about how different that audience is to say like the people who are watching TikTok who are probably a lot younger. And I guess like just more broadly my question is like what do these different audiences tell us? And I mean, how do we go about addressing the issue when the audiences for all of these different things and freakery seems to appeal to so many different audiences? Like, how do you even go about? Not that I'm asking you to solve the issue yourself, but I'm just wondering if you have thoughts on like, well, then what do we do with this information about audiences?
So several things. First, while for example, reality TV audiences are much more college educated than freak show audiences were, that reflects the change in college education for the entire population. Like it remains a very middle class to working class audience.
Mm-hmm.
Consistently from the rise of Barnum's American Museum to now when it comes to talking about adults. Teenagers are a little different in that audiences who are really engaged with this stuff in the majority are people who are very anxious about their status in society, for whom they want affirmation that they're one of the ones who are in control and on top. I will leave everything about Trump voters implied. That those who have a lot of wealth and power don't need to have it reaffirmed to them that they're normal. They can be as weird as they want and they're eccentric and everybody has to deal with it because they have wealth and power. It's really about that insecurity over identity and place in the world. teenagers, no matter who they are, live there. So this "am I normal" is the question that's on teenagers' mind 24/7, other than, oh God, do my sexual desires make me a freak?
Mhm.
Am I just a freak? And does the fact that I have hormones make me a freak? These are what teenagers think about. So they are deeply embedded in that anxiety. Many of them will outgrow it. They'll get to be adults. They'll feel confident in their place in the world. And they won't need to be constantly reaffirmed that they are better than other people.
Right.
But for those adults who feel like they have some power but not enough, finding somebody to look down on is really, really appealing. And it is something that they're going to revisit over and over and over again. As far as how to prevent it, well, to some degree we can't, because audiences, whether you're talking about a performance, or you're talking about a book, you're talking about historical essay, people bring their own stuff to what they engage with. Science, bias, all of it. It doesn't matter your field, bias is going to be there. That said, there are ways to do a better job. One of the first one is throwing out denial. The idea that just because we want to educate doesn't mean they want to be educated. Anyone who's worked in academia can tell you that. And so starting from, we're drawing on thousands of years of this tradition and hundreds of years of it being a middle class phenomenon. We're not going to break that. So we need to plan for it. We need to work around it. Allison, of course, dramaturgy. Good dramaturgy has a place everywhere. And there are ways to frame more fully and push the audience further. They can still say no, close their eyes, and only open them when they get to laugh at point and laugh. But for the audience that isn't going to actively fight us, we can guide them. But we have to know where they are to get them to where we want them to be. The cost of that often is audience. Like I said, with Push Girls, I think they did a better job of keeping it less of a freak show, but the cost was that it wasn't as successful. And so that's one of the wonderful things about disability arts, is when we're doing the cost is less money again, and we're all struggling, but doing work that isn't driven by corporate ideas of how much money can they make off the show creates more opportunities to actually teach. So it's not a perfect solution, but the number one thing I would say is dramaturgy, whether it's in the formal having a dramaturg or having somebody who's going to be a guide for the work and who's going to look at what we know and then what the production is trying to do and try and bridge that gap for the audience and guide them. And then, beyond that, it's hope for the best and keep trying, because there is a avalanche of eugenic ideology that we are all getting buried in every day. And so we're not going to be able to make that stop coming. All we can do is get our shovels and snow plows and keep fighting. Did that answer it?
It absolutely did. Thank you so much for giving a much better answer than I think anybody probably could. Thank you so much. And thank you for giving a shout out to dramaturgy. As a dramaturg, I very much appreciate that.
Yep. I very much believe in the role of the cultural critic and historian in making our art better. Other questions or comments?
I'm guessing that Grover and Fred and I are probably the only ones that are old enough to actually been to an old-fashioned freak show. But I do remember as a child going to a freak show. I will always remember seeing a tank full of mermaids. There were others, but that was the one that, to me, I couldn't stop looking at them. And I, for years and years and years, aspired to be a mermaid. I limped as a kid, and so my legs always were something I hated. And so to see these mermaids that didn't have legs and still somehow were considered beautiful seemed like this is the solution to the fact that I don't fit in. I could fit in as a mermaid. But I do remember some of the other this was in Peru versus in the United States. And I think they probably allowed more graphic sorts of exhibits than they would have allowed here. I mean, there were people who I am reasonably positive had their bodies scarred, manipulated, forced to look different.
Yeah.
And they were horrible to look at, absolutely horrible to look at. And I didn't ever want to go again, except to see the mermaids. I went back to see the mermaids, but I didn't want to go to any other part of the freak show because to me it portrayed horror, but the mermaids didn't.
Yeah, I have been to an old style freak show, more as a researcher than a participant, I guess. And I admit I'm uncomfortable with it. Like the fact that I recognize that for performers it can be a chosen path to independence, still makes me have complicated feelings when I think about the ways that the existence of the freak shows has a cultural impact on reaffirming the inhumanity of disabled people. But then I think about it and I'm like, yeah, but the cultural impact of freak shows is so small versus the cultural impact of other ways that eugenics is reaffirmed. And it's completely like it's not the performers who are doing their best who are pushing that ideology. But no, even like I said, having spent decades embedded in this work, I have complicated feelings about it. I don't think there are easy answers. But regarding the mermaid comment, yeah, no, I do think it is very interesting and compelling how not, finding a path outside of failing at being normal can be so affirming. And if embracing the freak works, and while I do not perform as a freak show performer, there are elements of the freak or the monster I have embraced in my own life. That rather than trying to always claim humanity when it's denied, it's like, okay, I'm comfortable being the monster you're afraid of. There is power in that. And so we're all making our own complicated decisions on how to balance this reality we're living in. Fred, question.
Well, just kind of a comment, I guess. I've never been to a freak show. I remember there was a Lenny Bruce routine about a freak show, which was Hubert's Museum in New York City. And he runs down the list of the acts and turns it into kind of social commentary. But I mentioned before this YouTube channel, Ask a Mortician, and I think you might be interested in it. Aside from the iconic corpse portion, she talks about how our treatment of death and dead people has changed over the last century or so. The industrialization of the death industry, and particularly the creation of the invention of embalming, and how that has turned cadavers, dead people, into kind of freaks, leading to this wave of social anxiety. Like she talks about the rise of the romantic vampire, for example, coming out of that. So I think you might be very interested in that. Yeah, Hubert's Museum.
Yeah, I watched some of her stuff. And yeah, she is consistently compelling. And the views of death and the dead are very cultural.
Mhm.
And it can get really interesting to see how humans negotiate the idea of ending in various ways, which can often get brought back to colonialism and freak shows when uh, uh, bodies that have cultural meaning, and not just mummies and the whole history of mummy unwrappings as performance, but the shrunken heads thing that freak shows love to promote, many of which were fake, but there was a whole industry of buying them from New Guinea, and then creating a market for items that were rare and with strong cultural meaning, and creating an industry to kill people so you could make shrunken heads to sell to tourists, who would then put them in cabinets of curiosities or dime museums or sideshows. Um, it circles around and around and around these ideas of the human, and who counts and who doesn't, and the way that freak shows serve as a negotiation space because of this liminality, this betweenness that not just the performers but the entire space is granted. Though on the flip side, the audience goes in with the conclusion already planned. That's the opportunity to indulge in the liminality, into the exploration of other answers for how to live, how to negotiate with death, how to see the world. But then the group, and freak shows are a group activity for a reason, because one-on-one, yes, there can be more abuse, but also one-on-one, there's the temptation to seek knowledge, to build respect, to have empathy. Whereas in a group, everybody gets to play in that space, and then they have the collective ritualized rejection of it. Um, uh, and while the traditional freak shows are um, maybe not fully dead, but definitely in the crumbling zombie stage, um, our culture keeps reinventing new spaces for freak performance, because both the engagement with the possibility of something new and different, of other ideas, of other ways of living, and the rejection of it are things that people still crave. I don't know if that got too far off topic.
This is Grover. Can you hear Grover? Can you hear Grover? Susan, I think you mentioned my age a few moments ago, which is I'm very pleased with my age at this point.
Mhm.
I certainly went to, I was in the present, going to small southern carnivals. They were always, the enormous paintings of the freaks, and I was very much attracted to just the getting the image on the canvas, I guess. So I don't recall going into the enter tent, but once, and I do recall that once you got in, after the show, they charged. You could see other things, more details if you paid a little more.
Oh, yeah.
Like a dime or something. And I'm remembering that this was all under the guise of the world of mirth. That was seems like that was always the name of the carnival. Maybe that was the circuit, Augusta, Georgia, and surrounding small towns. But let me add this, that I actually have here in my apartment a illustration I did of Caliban and Ariel in The Tempest, because I was always intrigued by Caliban. I guess it's back to high school reading Shakespeare, the little Shakespeare that I read. So anyway, from the point of view of the depictions, you're mentioning Rosemary Garland Thompson. Am, I'm retired from Emory, so I knew her. I have my autographed copy of Seeing, and she accompanied us, a group of us, over to the state hospital at Milledgeville once. There was an Emory bus that took some of us who had sort of come back, had gone back when we heard that she, Rosemary, was lecturing, and the actually the topic was, does the name Mab Segrest mean anything to anyone? She wrote
I'm not
a
aware of it.
Well, anyway, Mab Segrest was a scholar who came there to Emory and did a somewhat, I guess you'd say, revisionist of the Central State Hospital in Milledgeville, which at one time was the largest in the world. But anyway, so I do get off on tangents, but I, I was certainly intrigued by your background, Kataya, as far as drama at Tufts. So anyway, I'll let it go at that. But I will be getting in touch with you, talking about some more, you know, realms. So thank you
Boy,
very much
so
for your
exciting.
presentation.
Thank you. And yeah, I'm definitely interested in hearing more from you. And I would love to see a photograph of that work you have. Caliban and Ariel, yeah, such interesting characters. And again, part of that negotiation of the early colonial project. Um, uh, and Caliban and his mother, the witch, so the monster, and Caliban the freak, and the justification of conquest. There's so much tasty, tasty stuff in there.
Yes, yes,
Thank you. Thank you
thank
for
you.
sharing.
Get into the whole discussion of monsters in Hesiod's Theogony. I mean, it goes way, way back.
Yeah, and it's really interesting to look at, like, with early teratology, not modern teratology, what were known as the monstrous races. And uh so, the blimmies with the mouths on their stomachs, and the people who hopped around on one foot, who always lived just over that next hill. And the books that collected engravings and descriptions of the monstrous races of the world that were side by side with early medical documents on disabilities, birth defects, other extraordinary bodies, and the ways in which the existence of things, people like conjoined twins were equivocated to and used to justify the belief in monstrous humans on other continents, which then, of course, was used to justify the colonial project, because if the people in the next continent over, or the next town over, or over the mountain aren't human the way you are, then obviously they have no right to their stuff, and taking it isn't a crime. So this, again, it's so entwined. You cannot pick apart the history of monstrosity and the history of disability. And obviously this is more focused on Europe, but it happens in its own ways in other cultures as well. The anxieties expressed are not always the same. Like there's a fascinating genre of pornography in South Africa about the takalash, which is a monster that several of the cultures in what's colonially taken as South Africa believe in. It's like a little 3-foot tall guy with a giant schlong who is known for saving children who are lost in the woods and also being a rapist. And so there's this genre of porn around the takalash and gay rape, and that's very tied up in the cultural anxiety around homosexuality. And so by diverting it onto a non-human monster, it's able to be explored without being directly engaged with. Also, I did a children's play about a takalash, which creeped me out. Stories from baby Katya's theater years. They focused on the helping kids who are lost in the woods part, not the other part. And so again, like, it's about what are the anxieties of that culture and how they are expressed in the monsters, and then how the monsters are applied onto the people in those who are considered freaks.
Well, yeah, I'm just thinking, Julius Caesar trying to conquer Britain because Britain was supposedly filled with monsters and Celts and, half human, half whatever. That it just had such a fascination for his readers, I guess.
Yeah.
But it's that mythologizing and then using that to justify, conquest.
And we still see it. A friend of mine did a paper that is in a different book that I'm in, edited by Michael Chimmers and Anna Lola Santana, about use of monstrous language to describe refugees. So as hordes of zombies or as sea monsters in Europe that are coming and invading the land. Or you'll see it if you look for it in court cases about police shootings, especially of Black children. You'll see the word monster over and over again.
Oh,
I
yeah,
saw
everywhere
a
under the sun.
monster. It seemed like he was a monster. And that does
Right.
very particular work because monsters have teeth and claws, so they're never unarmed, are innately dangerous and threatening, so that attacking is innately the right thing to do.
Yeah.
Monsters are fought by heroes, and so that instead of it being about an adult who murdered a child, now it's a hero who's conquered a monster. And that language and those ideas are so embedded in our consciousness and in our cultures that
Oh, yeah.
they're constantly popping out all over the place, because when anxieties are that core to a cultural um group, there is no way to keep it contained, which interestingly is one of the things that monsters are supposed to do. Monsters show up wherever there's borders, wherever there's containment, wherever there's an inside and the outside. They're not on your side,
Oh no,
being
no,
on
they're
the
not.
inside, but they mark the border. And that's one of the core things that Jeffrey Jerome Cohen talks about in Monster Theory, which is developed into this lovely new specialty baby microgenre called monster studies. There is a center for it that Michael Chimmers runs at UC Santa Cruz. And then this October, I'm going to Germany because there is the formation of the Euro American Center for Monster Studies is happening, and that's a huge deal for me. It's not there's not a lot of public information out about it yet because we start in October officially, but there's a lot of work happening now to build up to it. But yeah, and I don't think freak studies and monster studies are different topics. Traditionally, freak studies has been considered a specialty of disability studies, and monster studies has been a specialty of like literary or cultural art or cultural studies. But I think they're the same topic, just approached from different sides because they're so intertwined, and disability is right up in there.
This is Alice. I'm going to interrupt here. We're getting to the top of the hour, and we have a short video to show about our donations that are needed to continue our work here. Sharon's going to run that, and then we'll have a couple ending slides.
Thank you so much.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for coming to Devva's Room. Devva's Room is a virtual space open to all, seeking to bring anyone interested in disability studies together in conversation and in solidarity. Devva's Room is inspired by the life and legacy of Devva Kasnitz and her outstanding contributions to the field of disability studies. Devva's Room is volunteer-led by members of the Disability History and Culture Collective and the I Love You Lead On community. In a 2023 reflection, Devva wrote of her determination to be more comfortable in study and advocacy and to blend them together to create a diaspora of disability studies best ideas. By holding regular events led by prominent and emerging voices in disability studies, we hope to honor this mission. Devva believed in a fully inclusive world that respected everyone's communication strategies. Inclusive and accessible technology can be costly. You can help support technology expenses for Devva's Room, which will allow us to grow and expand. If you have the resources to contribute to the development and sustainability of Devva's Room, please consider donating by scanning the QR code on your screen or by visiting the link in the chat, donorbox.org/Devva-S-room. Thank you so much for showing up and learning together with us.
Yeah.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much.
You bet.
You can help make this space accessible. This is Alice again. I Love You Lead On community and all of its various projects are volunteer-led. We have a variety of ways you can support our efforts to provide full access. Our work includes the Disability History and Culture Collective, DHACC, this space, Devva's Room, Judy's Room, Justin's Room, and other events on the horizon. You can donate at iloveyou-leadon.com/donate. I love you lead on are all capitalized. Next slide. For updated information, the schedule and registration details, you can visit www.iloveyou-leadon.com/Devva, DEVVA, or bit.ly/Devva's Room, capital D and R. Past episodes playlist is on YouTube, bit.ly/Devva's Room playlist. E, R, and P are capitalized. You can also share your feedback about this event at bit.ly/all caps ILYLO- all caps DHACC event feedback. Event and feedback are capitalized. And items are in the chat as well.